You've probably heard it before. Remember the Maine. It's one of the most famous slogans in American history, right? A four-word rallying cry for an entire war. But what did it actually mean? And what was the real story behind it? Okay, let's get into it and find out. It all starts with a number, 258. That's how many American sailors died on the night of February 15th, 1898. Their battleship, the USS Maine, was just torn apart by this massive explosion while it was sitting in Havana Harbor, an absolutely staggering loss of life. And right away, the entire country was consumed by one single question. Was this some kind of tragic accident, or was this a deliberate act of war? And the answer to that question, well, it was going to change American history forever. So you have this explosive mystery at the center of everything. But the story Americans heard, that was shaped almost instantly by a really powerful new force in public life, the modern newspaper. And as we're about to see, the story you got depended completely on which one you picked up that morning. I mean, what's so striking here is just the speed and the certainty. This is just 2 days after the explosion. And William Randolph Hearst's newspaper, the New York Journal, wasn't just reporting the news, it was declaring a verdict. They immediately called it a crime and slapped down a huge reward, basically pointing a giant flashing arrow right at Spain. To really get a sense of how divided the narrative was, all you have to do is look at two of the biggest papers in the country. On the very same day, they were giving the American people two completely contradictory realities. And this just says it all, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the Journal's headline, which is a straight-up accusation, the work of an enemy. It's bold, it's emotional, it's a call to arms. Then you look at the New York Times, and it's all caution. It's talking about evidence. Maine's hull will decide. And it's floating this very plausible, nonviolent idea about spontaneous combustion in the coal supply. One paper is screaming for war, the other is pleading for patience. So, you have to ask, what was the Journal building its case on? Well, it sure wasn't hard evidence. It was secret opinions, beliefs, the so-called unanimous view of officers they don't even name, and the personal conviction of an influential politician, Theodore Roosevelt. This wasn't a case built on facts, it was built on emotion and insinuation. Now, the Times approach was the complete opposite. It was like night and day. They quoted the actual Secretary of the Navy, who was urging everyone to be cautious. They talked to an expert captain about the very real dangers of fires on warships. And they just kept hammering this one crucial point: wait for the official investigation. It was a clear call for reason over outrage. So if the evidence for an attack was so flimsy, why was the public, especially fueled by papers like the Journal, so ready to believe the absolute worst? The answer is that the USS Maine didn't explode in a vacuum. The kindling for a massive fire had already been piled high, right there in Cuba. You see, for years, Americans had been reading these horrific reports about how Spain was trying to crush a Cuban rebellion. The Spanish military had forced hundreds of thousands of civilians into these camps they called reconcentrados. This quote, which comes from a report sent to Washington, gives you a horrifying glimpse of what was going on inside them. And this really drives home the scale of the catastrophe. That same report estimated that in some areas, the death rate inside these camps was as high as 77%. This wasn't some distant conflict. It was a massive humanitarian disaster unfolding just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And the U.S. government knew exactly how bad things were. For months before the Maine ever sailed into Havana, the top American official in Cuba, Fitzhugh Lee, was sending urgent warnings back to Washington. He was basically saying the Navy needed to be ready to intervene at a moment's notice. The situation was a powder keg long before the actual explosion. So, picture this. You've got the media screaming for vengeance, the public is horrified by the crisis in Cuba, and all of that political pressure lands on the desk of one guy, President William McKinley. The pressure was unbelievable. So let's take a look at how he actually officially made the case for going to war. When McKinley finally went before Congress, he laid out 4 very clear reasons. First, he starts with the most noble one: we have to act in the cause of humanity. Then he pivots to national interests, protecting American citizens and our commerce. And finally, he frames the whole thing as a direct threat to American security, a constant menace to our peace. It was a carefully built argument designed to win over everybody. And here's the really brilliant part. It's how he used the Maine. He didn't just say, Spain blew up our ships, so we're going to war. Instead, he masterfully used it as the final, undeniable piece of evidence. The explosion, he argued, was impressive proof that the situation in Cuba was totally out of control, that things had become, in his words, intolerable.
But the war that came next, it turned out to be about so much more than just the crisis in Cuba or even the sinking of the Maine. It marked a fundamental shift in how America saw itself and its place on the world stage.
For about 75 years, American foreign policy was guided by this thing called the Monroe Doctrine. The easiest way to think of it is as a big keep-out sign that America posted over the Americas. It told European powers, this is our neighborhood, you can't colonize here anymore. So kicking Spain, the last big European power in the region, out of Cuba, well, for many that felt like the final fulfillment of that doctrine.
This political cartoon from 1901 just perfectly captures what happened next. You see Miss Colombia, who's a symbol for the U.S., inviting Miss Cuba, who's just been freed from the ball and chain of Spain, to join the Union and become a new star on the flag. You see? The War of Liberation very quickly became a question of annexation and empire.
But how could a nation that was founded on the idea of self-government justify ruling over other people? It's a huge contradiction, right? Well, a leading senator at the time, Albert Beveridge, gave an answer, and it's pretty chilling. He argued that liberty wasn't a universal right. He said it applied only to those who are capable of self-government. And in his mind, the people of Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines simply weren't capable. And this wasn't just about some supposed civilizing mission. A lot of it was just about national pride and, great power politics. Beveridge was looking at the global empires of Europe, of England and Germany, and basically saying, why not us? The argument was simple. Empire is what great nations do. It was America's turn to get in the game and prove it belonged in the same league. And underneath all of this was the powerful driving idea of manifest destiny. For many people, this wasn't just geopolitics or a sense of duty. It felt like a holy mission. As Beveridge puts it right here, this new American power wasn't a choice. It was a destiny given to them as God's chosen people. It was this potent cocktail of power, pride, and perceived divinity that really fueled the birth of an American empire. So, in the end, what was America? A liberator, stepping in for the cause of humanity, or a conqueror, using a tragedy as an excuse to build an empire? As we've seen, the answer really isn't simple. The real story of the war, just like the story of the Maine itself, depends entirely on which documents you read and which voices you choose to believe.